After 15 years apart, an African elephant recognizes its caretaker and does something that breaks the hearts of everyone present. In the vast golden plains of the American Southwest, where time seems to slip through the dry grasses and the whispers of ancient cottonwood trees, a profound connection began to take shape beneath the watchful glow of the setting sun. A connection that would transcend not only the barriers between species, but also the challenges posed by time and distance. A story that would prove some bonds, when genuine, can endure anything. Moses was a majestic elephant, his very presence commanding both respect and admiration wherever he roamed. His small, deep-set eyes seemed to hold an ancient wisdom, as though they kept secrets that only the most perceptive could decipher. His enormous ears moved gracefully to the rhythm of the desert breeze, picking up sounds imperceptible to many. And though his footsteps were heavy, they carried a certain elegance at odds with his massive build. Michael, meanwhile, was a man of average height, with a sincere gaze and a naturally generous spirit. From a young age, he had felt an unexplainable calling to work with animals. It was never just a job. It was a vocation that pulsated in every cell of his body. His hands, calloused by years of dedication, seemed crafted for the sole purpose of offering care and protection. His smile, though subdued, revealed a contagious passion for everything he did. The two souls met at a small wildlife sanctuary located in the southwestern plains of the United States, a place where echoes of ancient stories seemed to ripple through the rugged hills and wide-open valleys. Michael, newly hired, had come on board as the lead caretaker, bringing not just technical expertise, but a heart wide open and ready to forge genuine bonds with each creature under his watch. Moses had arrived at the sanctuary after being rescued from an abusive situation. His body, scarred both physically and emotionally, told a tale of suffering that Michael read with startling clarity. In those early days, the elephant stayed away from everyone, fearful and withdrawn, retreating to a quiet corner of his enclosure. His once bright eyes now held a deep-seated fear that seemed to eat away at his spirit. Michael understood that Moses's rehabilitation would be a slow process requiring infinite patience. Rather than push any kind of interaction, he took a wider, gentler path, simply being present. Every day he would sit nearby, speaking in a low, calm voice about anything that came to mind, from the scorching desert temperatures to stories of his own boyhood. At first, Moses acted as though he didn't notice. But over time, in ways so subtle they were almost imperceptible, the elephant's posture began to change. Then, one Sunday afternoon, with the sun painting the horizon in orange hues, Moses took the first step. Michael was seated next to the elephant's enclosure in quiet reflection when he felt a soft weight on his shoulder. Moses's trunk rested there lightly, as if testing not just the feel of Michael's skin, but the steadiness of his presence. That simple gesture signaled the birth of trust, a small miracle that moved the caretaker deeply. From that day on, their relationship bloomed in astonishing ways. Michael spent countless hours studying Moses's behavior and adapting his approach to the elephant's specific needs. Moses, in turn, displayed surprising intelligence and sensitivity, responding positively to the care and affection he received. Morning routines at the sanctuary took on new color and meaning. Michael always arrived before dawn, carrying fresh fruit he knew Moses would love. Upon sensing his presence, Moses let out low, rumbling calls that reverberated across the grounds, breaking the pre-dawn stillness with palpable joy. Together they strolled around the outer edge of the enclosure, watching nature awaken and sharing a companionable silence that said more than words ever could. Bath time, so crucial for elephants, became a ritual of affection rather than a simple chore. Using a brush made of natural fibers, Michael would gently scrub Moses's rough hide, removing grime and whispering words of encouragement. For his part, Moses clearly relished those moments, often spraying water about with his trunk in playful displays that left Michael drenched, prompting genuine laughter that echoed through the sanctuary. Other staff members watched this partnership with a mix of awe and disbelief. How could such a large, once traumatized animal now show such trust and affection? The answer was Michael's approach. his capacity to see beyond appearances, to recognize the innate dignity in every living being, and to communicate in a language that transcended ordinary words or gestures. Months rolled into years, and the bond between man and elephant deepened in ways few fully understood. A quiet, almost telepathic communication emerged between them, surprising even the sanctuary's most seasoned veterinarians. A single glance from Michael was enough for Moses to understand what was needed. A subtle shift of Moses's ears conveyed his emotional state with uncanny precision. During their downtime, when the weight of the day dissolved under the star-filled desert sky, Michael often sat by Moses's enclosure. Sometimes he would read aloud from his favorite books. Other times they simply shared the comforting silence of the night. Moses would draw closer to the fence, as if trying to close the physical gap between them, extending his trunk in a gesture that seemed to say, "I'm here, my friend." Always. It was on one of those nights that Michael shared a secret with Moses, something he had never told anyone. He spoke of a childhood marked by painful losses, of the loneliness that had trailed him most of his life, of the emptiness that no human companionship had ever fully relieved. As the words poured out, silent tears ran down his cheeks, releasing the kind of pain one locks away for years. Moses, as if sensing the gravity of that confession, stayed absolutely still, his eyes trained on Michael's, his slow breathing, forging a gentle rhythm that somehow soothed the caretaker's troubled heart. "You've shown me more about real connection than any person ever has," Michael admitted, brushing away tears as a bittersweet smile tugged at his lips. "It's strange to think I found true compassion in the gaze of someone who doesn't even speak my language." That confession sealed a silent pact between them, a promise of presence, acceptance, and loyalty that transcended all the usual limitations of speech. Brought together by unlikely circumstances, man and elephant saw in each other the reflection of their own most essential emotional needs. But, as so often happens, fate had other plans for that extraordinary partnership. One seemingly ordinary morning, Michael was urgently called to the sanctuary's main office. There, he learned of a critical situation in a distant region of the country. A group of elephants was in grave danger due to escalating conflicts between local authorities and private owners who refused to give up illegally acquired wildlife. His unique skill set made him the ideal candidate to head the rescue mission. Choosing to go was agonizing. On one hand, he felt the weight of responsibility to save innocent animals caught in a dire situation. On the other, he couldn't bear the thought of leaving Moses, risking the delicate routine they had so carefully built. After hours of painful reflection, Michael accepted the mission, convinced that his duty to protect extended beyond the sanctuary's gates. Later that same day, he approached Moses with a heavy heart, unable to explain with words what was about to happen. Still, as always, something deeper passed between them. Looking into Moses's eyes, Michael sensed the elephant understood in some mysterious way. There was a resigned acceptance in his gaze, an ageless wisdom that seemed to say, "Some journeys must be taken apart." Their final contact was painfully brief. Michael rested his forehead against Moses's trunk, closing his eyes and drinking in the animal's presence, memorizing every detail, from the elephant's distinctive scent to the rough texture of his skin, to the comforting warmth that radiated from that enormous body. "I'll come back," he whispered, voice tight with emotion. "Wait for me." Before dawn the next morning, Michael set off with only the essentials, carrying a burden in his heart that outweighed any physical luggage. What he couldn't know as the car vanished into the dusty horizon was that circumstances would prevent him from keeping his promise far longer than he ever imagined. While Michael faced dangers and complexities on his mission, Moses went through his own trial. Owing to administrative changes at the sanctuary, officials decided the elephant should be moved to a larger, more modern facility hundreds of miles away. The transition proved traumatic for Moses, who fought stubbornly against leaving the environment he associated with safety, and, most importantly, the comfort of Michael's presence. Although his new caretakers were technically skilled, their methods felt far more mechanical, focused on efficiency and rigid protocols. with little attention to the emotional nuances that had defined Moses's relationship with Michael. Sensitive to the shift, Moses grew more guarded by the day, becoming withdrawn and less responsive, as though a vital part of himself had been left behind. In the first few months after the separation, Michael tried desperately to keep in touch, sending messages and asking for frequent updates on Moses's condition. But as his mission grew more complicated, stretching far beyond any original timeline, communication became sporadic and eventually ceased altogether. The harsh realities of fieldwork consumed his energy, forcing him to focus on immediate survival and the welfare of the animals in the new rescue operation under his care. Years slipped by, each one adding fresh layers of experiences that shaped both man and elephant. Moses gradually adapted to his new surroundings, developing a routine that, though lacking the emotional depth he had once known, allowed him to live with a semblance of peace. Where before he had shown obvious signs of curiosity and affection, he was now more reserved, as if guarding his feelings deep within. Michael, meanwhile, found himself entangled in a series of assignments that took him to some of the most remote and perilous places in the country. His work, though impactful in safeguarding wildlife, exacted a personal toll. Physical and emotional scars accumulated, forming layers of armor that gradually obscured the idealistic young man he had once been. In rare moments of calm, typically just before daybreak, Michael allowed himself to recall the days spent with Moses. Those memories appeared like vivid flashes that briefly lit the darkness threatening to engulf him. The soft pressure of Moses's trunk against his shoulder, that all-knowing gaze that seemed to pierce his very soul, the shared baths under the scorching sun, glimpses of a simple happiness that now felt as though it belonged to a different life, a different person. 15 years passed since their painful parting, long enough to transform landscapes, reshape lives, and change circumstances beyond recognition. Michael, now with premature streaks of gray in his dark hair and lines etched into a face once so full of youth, had finally returned to the U.S. After years of self-imposed exile. He opened a small veterinary clinic in a coastal city, caring mostly for house pets and occasionally consulting on wildlife kept in captivity. Then, one otherwise ordinary Thursday afternoon, a phone call broke through the monotony of his life. The voice on the other end belonged to Laura, a former colleague from the old sanctuary, someone Michael had nearly forgotten after so many years spent distancing himself from that past. "Michael, I know it's been a long time, and this call might catch you off guard," she began, her voice carrying a curious mix of hesitation and urgency. "But something's happened, and you need to know." Michael's heart hammered in his chest, a sixth sense telling him this conversation would change his life's direction. "What is it, Laura?" he asked, her name sounding foreign on his tongue after so many years. "It's about Moses," she answered. Those two words made Michael's world freeze. He's back at the original sanctuary. With all the mergers and administrative shifts, they brought some of the older animals together in one place. And, well, something extraordinary is going on with him. Michael closed his eyes as a flood of memories washed over him. "What do you mean by extraordinary?" he said, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. "He won't interact with any caretaker, stays off by himself, barely eats enough to stay healthy, shows clear signs of depression," Laura explained, pausing before adding, "except when someone mentions your name, Michael. Those few times he gets visibly agitated, almost like he's searching for something. Or someone." The implications of her words struck Michael like a tidal wave. Could it be that, after 15 long years, Moses still remembered their bond? Could an animal, even one as intelligent as an elephant, hold on to an emotional connection for that long? "The experts here are baffled," Laura went on. "Some think it's just coincidence. Others talk about the legendary memory of elephants. But I believe he's missing you, Michael. And I thought you should know." A heavy silence settled over the call, thick with unspoken questions and overwhelming possibilities. Michael felt his throat tighten with a long, dormant emotion, a blend of hope and dread, longing and regret. Part of him wanted to hang up and bury that chapter of his life once again. But another part, a part he believed had died years ago, Suddenly, came roaring back, desperate for a chance to make things right. "When can I see him?" he finally asked, his voice betraying the inner battle he was waging. Laura's relief was audible. "Whenever you can come, I'll arrange everything." 3 days later, Michael boarded a plane, gazing through the window at the American landscape unfurling beneath him. Deciding to return had not been easy. For countless sleepless nights, he had weighed the emotional risks, questioned his motives, and tried to predict every possible outcome of this reunion. What if Moses didn't recognize him? What if recognition only brought renewed pain for them both? What if the bond they'd shared had been erased by the relentless march of time? These doubts haunted him, merging with deeper uncertainties about whether he could even face the past he had so carefully locked away. As the plane began its descent, Michael closed his eyes, allowing memories he'd repressed to come flooding back. He remembered the young man he had once been, unshakably convinced of compassion's power to transform, unyieldingly certain that every living thing, human or otherwise, deserved dignity and respect. At what point had that young man begun to fade, replaced by someone more guarded, more disillusioned? Exactly when had hope ceded to cynicism and passion to cold pragmatism? The landing and the drive to the sanctuary passed. In a blur, Michael moved as though in a trance, responding politely but automatically to staff members Laura introduced him to, registering the sweeping changes made to the facility over the years. His mind focused entirely on the one moment he both longed and feared. At last, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the enclosure where Moses was held. Michael's heart drummed so hard it bordered on painful, his palms damp with sweat, as he approached the moment that would decide whether 15 years had truly erased the once unbreakable bond. He usually sticks to that shaded area at this time of day, Laura said, gesturing to a far corner of the large enclosure. "I think it's best if you go on alone from here." Michael nodded silently, unable to find words for the gratitude he felt toward Laura for her sensitivity. With tentative steps, he moved closer to the spot she had indicated, every yard feeling like it bore the weight of all those years apart. And then he saw him. Moses stood partly concealed under the shade of a tall cottonwood, his colossal shape outlined against the carefully designed habitat. Michael halted at a respectful distance, content just to watch the animal who had occupied so many of his thoughts for so long. Time had not treated Moses kindly. His tusks, once so impressive, were noticeably worn. His skin bore fresh scars, each telling an untold story of life's hardships. His movements, so fluid and graceful before, were now slightly slower, more deliberate. Yet there was no mistaking it. This was still Moses, the same being Michael had once known in what felt like another lifetime. For several minutes, Michael stood motionless, afraid that any sudden motion would shatter the moment. It was Moses who finally noticed his presence. The elephant turned his great head, fixing dark, watchful eyes on Michael. In a dreadful instant, Michael saw no sign of recognition, only the wary appraisal of an animal confronting a stranger. "Moses," he called gently, the name tumbling from his lips like a prayer. "It's me, Michael." Time seemed to freeze. Moses remained perfectly still, his massive ears twitching slightly as though straining to capture every nuance of a voice long unheard. Michael held his breath, heart thumping wildly, waiting for any flicker of acknowledgement. Then it happened. A faint tremor rippled across the elephant's body, and Moses's eyes suddenly sparkled with something that went beyond simple animal cognition. With astonishing speed for his age and size, Moses stepped forward. Trunk lifting in a gesture Michael recognized at once, the same greeting they had shared so many times years before. A wave of emotion crashed over Michael, tearing down every defensive wall he had built. Without thinking, he hurried toward the elephant, tears streaming freely down his cheeks. Their reunion was heartbreakingly gentle, Moses's trunk lightly touching Michael's face, as though confirming he was real and not some memory conjured by lonely nights. "You remembered," Michael managed between sobs, his hands trembling as he stroked the rough skin he had once known so well. "After all these years, you still remembered me." The sound Moses made in response defied any human vocabulary, a deep, rumbling vocalization that reverberated with the weight of every year they had been apart. His trunk moved with careful precision, curling gently around Michael's arm, firm, enough to convey, "I won't let you leave me again, but not so tight as to cause pain." Overwhelmed, Michael sank to his knees. The burden of all the choices, all the regret and loss seemed to collapse on him at once. "I'm sorry," he whispered again and again, though he knew concepts like guilt and forgiveness might be meaningless in Moses's world. "I should have come back sooner. I should have tried harder." Neither man nor elephant could say how long they stayed that way, locked in an embrace that defied logic or expectation. Time felt irrelevant, dissolving into the sheer wonder of that extraordinary moment. When Michael finally pulled back just far enough to look into Moses's face again, he was stunned by what he saw. Tears. Small, glistening droplets rolled from Moses's eyes, a rare phenomenon scientists still debate. In that instant, no scientific theory mattered. What Michael saw was unmistakable, an emotion as genuine as anything a human could express. Moses didn't just remember him. He had longed for him, suffered through his absence, and preserved his memory in some sacred, unassailable place within. "I won't leave you again," Michael vowed, this time with the ironclad conviction of someone who finally understood what truly matters. "We're together now." In the days that followed, Michael rearranged his entire life. He made calls, filed paperwork, rescheduled commitments, defying every practical concern and the cautious advice of more pragmatic voices. He accepted a permanent position at the sanctuary, determined to spend the rest of his career rebuilding the relationship he had nearly lost forever. Moses's transformation was immediate and astounding. The elephant, who had shown obvious symptoms of depression, began to thrive again. He resumed eating normally, interacted with his surroundings, and even engaged in playful behavior that astonished the veterinary staff, playfulness that none of them had witnessed for years. Experts observing the situation were intrigued, some even confounded. Many saw in Moses's story undeniable proof of elephants' extraordinary emotional capacity, their ability to form bonds every bit as deep as those in humans. Skeptics, however, sought alternative explanations, reluctant to assign human-like emotional depth to any animal, no matter how intelligent. Michael, meanwhile, cared little for theories or academic squabbles. The truth was right there in Moses's eyes, in the way the elephant sought his company, in the wordless but profound communication that re-established itself so smoothly after so many years. Some bonds, Michael realized, simply transcend everything. Distance, time, even the obstacles life throws in the way. A new routine grew between them, different from the old one, but just as meaningful. Now they were aging together, each bearing the marks of separate journeys, yet finding solace in each other's company. On quiet mornings, while the sanctuary still lay hushed in the desert mist, Michael often sat near Moses's enclosure and spoke in a soft voice, relating stories about the intervening years, the adventures he'd had, and the lessons he'd learned. One such morning, watching the rising sun bathe the plains in gold, Michael reflected on the improbable miracle he had witnessed. 15 years, enough time to reshape landscapes, to change countless lives, for a newborn to grow into an adult, and yet not enough time to erase a genuine bond. Moses's memory, preserved with crystalline clarity despite unimaginable hardships, was a powerful testament to the sheer scope of true love, not only in humans but across living creatures. "Some bonds," Michael murmured, more to himself than to the elephant resting serenely at his side, "are simply eternal." Moses stirred his huge ears in agreement, as though endorsing a fundamental truth that transcended species and speech. His calm gaze rested on the far horizon, reflecting the same golden light that lit Michael's face. Reunited after a separation that should have made recognition impossible, man and elephant offered a potent reminder of forgiveness, resilience, and the unbreakable nature of authentic love. Word of Michael and Moses's story spread quickly, among sanctuary staff, then into wider conservation circles, and finally captured the imagination of the general public. Journalists requested interviews, Documentarians clamored for permission to film the extraordinary pair, and scientists proposed research projects to examine the deeper implications of this singular case. Michael, fiercely protecting the newly restored peace Moses was finally enjoying, declined most of these requests. He understood the educational value the story might have, how it could inspire greater respect for animals and deeper appreciation for the emotional complexity of other species. But he placed Moses's well-being above everything else, knowing the elephant had endured more than enough upheavals for a lifetime. The few observers permitted to visit inevitably walked away, moved in ways they struggled to describe. There was something almost sacred in how man and elephant interacted, a bond so seamless and natural that it defied standard explanation. They weren't just friends reunited. They were two souls that had found in each other something essential, something that filled an elemental void each had carried through those long years apart. "What amazes me most," remarked a well-known ethologist who spent several days studying them, "is not just that Moses recognized Michael after all. This time, it's that this emotional memory remained so vivid, as if sealed away in a box until the right moment to shine again." Michael answered with a gentle smile. "Perhaps," he said softly, "we humans underestimate just how deep life runs outside our own species. Moses taught me the language of the heart can leap over barriers we thought were impossible." Over the following months, Moses's health improved dramatically. His once dull skin now showed a healthy sheen. His eyes glimmered with a renewed spark of life, and his positive energy seemed to ripple through the sanctuary, touching every creature in his orbit. In turn, Michael experienced his own quiet renewal. The worry lines etched into his face began to soften, replaced by expressions that spoke more of laughter than stress. His body, always tense as though anticipating the next crisis, now moved with a relaxed ease that reflected a newfound inner peace. "It's like he's healing you as much as you're healing him," Laura observed one afternoon, watching Moses bask in the hot sun during a playful bath. Michael nodded, recognizing the profound truth in that simple statement. "I think that's exactly what's happening," he admitted. "I spent so many years trying to save everyone else that at some point I forgot to save myself. Moses, he reminded me what really matters." One especially hot afternoon, Michael took Moses on a walk in a more remote area of the sanctuary, a privilege reserved for only the most emotionally balanced animals. As they ambled across the rocky terrain, Moses suddenly paused, focusing on something in the distance beyond Michael's range of perception. Without warning, the elephant let out a low, resonant call and headed purposefully toward a verdant little valley just up ahead. Following him curiously, Michael soon grasped the reason for Moses's abrupt change in behavior. In the valley's center, partly hidden by thick shrubs, was a young elephant, clearly weak and frightened. The little one's ears flicked nervously, watching Moses's approach with apprehension. "My God," Michael whispered, instantly recognizing the trauma signs. Likely an orphaned elephant rescued from an illegal roadside zoo, now awaiting full medical assessment. What happened next left Michael speechless. With a tenderness that defied his massive size, Moses approached the younger elephant, his trunk extended in a gesture that felt like both a greeting and an offer of comfort. The newcomer, after a few tense moments, finally responded, gingerly touching trunks with the older elephant. That single contact seemed to seal a silent pact between them. Moses stood protectively by the young elephant, occasionally brushing him with his trunk in unmistakable reassurance. The little one, seemingly understanding those nonverbal cues, relaxed by degrees, his defensive posture giving way to fledgling trust. "He's doing for him exactly what I did for Moses," Michael realized, fighting back tears at the sight of it. "He's giving him presence, unconditional acceptance, safety with no strings attached." In the days that followed, Moses voluntarily took on the role of mentor to the young elephant, whom the veterinary team had named Toby. Under Michael's watchful guidance, the two formed a bond mirroring the one man and elephant had shared years before. Moses exhibited boundless patience, adjusting to the younger elephant's pace, respecting his fears, and celebrating every small victory. "It's like closing a circle," Michael remarked to Laura, watching Moses gently guide Toby through a feeding session. "He's passing on the care he once received." This new dynamic added another dimension to an already extraordinary tale. Scientists who had shown only passing interest before now returned, brimming with deeper questions about elephants' capacity for cultural transmission, about how such animals can transform personal struggles into altruistic behavior directed toward others. A renowned primatologist, after several days of close observation, stated with conviction, "What's happening here challenges our basic understanding of moral behavior in animals. This isn't just instinct. It's a conscious choice to aid another being, informed by personal experience of suffering and recovery." But for Michael, the scientific ramifications, fascinating though they were, paled beside the sheer beauty of that connection. There was something deeply redemptive about seeing Moses's past pain, the trauma of separation, the long years of emotional isolation, turn into active compassion for another vulnerable creature. "Maybe that's what we're all searching for," he mused one night under a sky blazing with desert stars. "Not just to be understood or loved, but to find a way to turn our own wounds into something that heals others." As the seasons shifted, the improvised family forged ever stronger bonds. Under Moses's patient mentorship, Toby blossomed, his once weak body gaining strength and vigor, his eyes, once clouded by fear, now brimming with youthful curiosity. From a distance, Michael often marveled at who was really teaching whom in that remarkable cross-species alliance. News of the unusual trio eventually spread throughout the conservation world, drawing attention from significant donors who, impressed by the implications of the case, offered generous funding to expand the sanctuary. What began as a personal story of reunion was swiftly evolving into a catalyst for systemic changes that would benefit dozens of other animals. "You see what's happening here, don't you?" Laura remarked one morning as they strolled through the newly enlarged grounds. "In a way, Moses is saving this entire place, every creature here, simply because he remembered you." Michael smiled, feeling the weight of those words. The idea that one moment of recognition could trigger a chain reaction of such widespread positive change was both humbling and inspiring. "I guess that's how the world really changes," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Not through grand, heroic gestures, but through genuine connections that spark further connections." Exactly 1 year after the reunion that altered both their lives, Michael brought a small camera along to record Moses and Toby on their daily walk. He never intended to share the footage publicly. He simply wanted a personal record of moments that defied everyday explanations. As he filmed, he captured a scene of quiet wonder. Moses patiently teaching Toby how to use his trunk to gather water, displaying a remarkable gentleness while the younger elephant fumbled. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over them, creating an almost otherworldly aura, as the pair, absorbed in their silent dialogue, seemed oblivious to everything beyond that moment. That simple video, originally shown only to a few close colleagues, found its way to online platforms and quickly went viral. Millions worldwide were moved by the sight of two elephants, one older, marked by time and experience, the other young, still learning the basics of life, bound by a link that defied easy explanation. "They only see the surface," Michael remarked when Laura told him about the global reaction. "Beneath what looks like a simple moment lies a history of loss, separation, suffering, and in the end, a profound healing. Maybe that's precisely why so many people connect with it," Laura responded thoughtfully. "On a gut level, everyone recognizes this journey. We've all known our own separations, our own yearned-for reunions." The insight lingered with Michael in the ensuing days, as he received messages from strangers all over the world who felt deeply drawn to Moses's story. People recounted their own tales of loss and reunion, connections that survived impossible odds, moments of recognition that changed their lives. It was as though the story of an elephant who recognized his caretaker after 15 years had become a mirror in which many could see their own deepest hopes, that certain ties really can remain unbroken, that certain relationships truly can transcend both time and distance. On a starry night, sitting by the enclosure where Moses and Toby now slumbered peacefully, Michael let himself feel the full gravity of all they had experienced. A simple act of recognition had rippled outward in widening circles, touching more lives than he could have imagined, sparking hope in corners of the world he would never even visit. "Who would have guessed," he murmured to the elephant who regarded him with those wise eyes that seemed to take in more than mere words, "that your heart would be big enough to remember me after so long, and that such a memory would change not just our lives, but so many others as well?" Moses moved closer, extending his trunk through the railing in that same familiar gesture that still, even months later, filled Michael with an almost overwhelming sense of wonder. Gently, Michael laid his hand on that rough hide, feeling the steady pulse that spoke of life, resilience, and a capacity for love that defied any attempt to categorize or contain it. In that moment of silent communion, across languages, across species, lay a fundamental truth that no cultural or biological barrier could conceal. The heart remembers what truly matters. Even after years of separation, it will recognize those it holds dear. It was a truth so simple, so profound, that it continued to pierce the hearts of everyone who witnessed it in the extraordinary story of the elephant who never forgot.